Dakar. Promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar and Monrovia, 1 p.m. in Niamey. Good afternoon and welcome to Newslink on West Africa Democracy, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world at wadr.org. First, our top stories. Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré calls for greater national sovereignty as the country marks 66 years of independence. Former Togolese Minister of Armed Forces, Margaret Nyakade, begins a hunger strike in protest over detention conditions.
Nous travaillons à la libération de tous les détenus politiques.
We are working towards the release of all political prisoners. The most prominent are indeed Margaret Nyakade and Patan Ashigbi.
A flood disaster hits Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown, leaving at least 5 people dead and hundreds displaced. And coalition of civil groups in Guinea denounces institutions established during the country's military transition.
It is very true that we do not recognize the institutions resulting from this election because there has been no election.
Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is Sankulu Jibril Janko.
Today marks Burkina Faso's 66th independence celebration, and transitional president Captain Ibrahim Traoré has used the occasion to renew his call for national sovereignty and self-reliance. In a message to the nation, Traoré urged Burkinabe citizens to embrace what he described as the ideals of the popular progressive revolution, saying they provide the roadmap for building a politically, economically and security independent Burkina Faso. Christopher Atichi reports.
Burkina Faso's transitional president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has called on citizens to rally behind the government vision of national sovereignty as the country marks the 66th anniversary of its independence. In a message to the nation issued on Wednesday, Traoré said the aspirations that accompanied Burkina Faso's independence on August 5, 1960 had been undermined by what he described as persistent attempts at domination and exploitation of the country's wealth. He said Burkina Faso remains engaged in what he called a struggle to reclaim full control of its territory while pursuing what he described as total sovereignty in political, economic and security affairs. The transitional leader urged Burkinabe people to embrace the ideas of the popular progressive revolution, describing them as compass that will guide the country towards development based on its own resources. Traoré also paid tribute to historical figures who fought against neocolonialism, as well as members of the defense and security forces currently engaged in operations against armed groups, praising their commitment to protecting the country's territorial integrity. His message comes as Burkina Faso continues to redefine its political and security partnerships while promoting a governance model centered on national sovereignty and self-reliance. Captain Traoré concluded by calling on every Burkinabe citizen to contribute to building what he described as a new, dignified, truly free, independent, and sovereign nation, insisting that the principles of popular progressive revolution remain the foundation for a strong and prosperous Burkina Faso.
Christopher Aticho with that report. Malian authorities have taken another step in rebuilding the country's security sector by integrating 254 former fighters into the National Armed Forces. The move forms part of the country's disarmament, demobilization, reintegration and integration program, launched after the collapse of the Algiers peace agreement and the withdrawal of the UN peacekeeping mission, MINUSMA. Damora Amo reports.
Mali has incorporated 254 former fighters into the Malian Armed Forces as part of its disarmament, demobilization, reintegration and integration program, also known as DDRI. The new recruits include former members of the Dogon Self-Defense Group, traditional Dosso hunters, and recruits drawn from Fulani armed movements, most of them from the central regions of Segu, Mopti, and Banjargara. They were admitted with the rank of Private First Class after completing military training. The integration represents the first phase of a broader government plan to absorb 2,000 former fighters into the defense forces while providing socio-economic reintegration for another 1,000 beneficiaries unable to serve in the military. However, human rights organizations have urged the government to ensure rigorous background checks, noting that several armed groups and security actors operating in central Mali have faced allegations of serious human rights abuses in recent years. The Malian government has not disclosed the outcome of the vetting process for the 254 recruits, their future deployments, or when the remaining former fighters are expected to be integrated. Officials also have not made public the overall budget for the program.
Deborah Amo reporting. Nigeria's Defense Minister General Christopher Musa has called for closer security cooperation between ECOWAS and the Alliance of the Sahel States, AES, to combat terrorism and transnational crime across West Africa. Speaking during a working visit to Benin, General Musa said the region's security threats do not recognize national borders and require stronger intelligence sharing despite coordination and practical cooperation among neighboring states. He also called for a regional framework capable of addressing terrorism, violent extremism, transnational crime, and maritime insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea. The appeal comes as ECOWAS and the Alliance of the Sahel States continue negotiations aimed at redefining their relationships following withdrawal of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger from the regional bloc. Recent discussions between the two sides have focused on future security cooperation, logistical corridors, and preserving free movement of people, despite continuing political differences between the two regional organizations.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
At least 5 people have died and hundreds of residents have been displaced after hours of torrential rain triggered widespread flooding across Freetown, Sierra Leone. Monday's downpour, which lasted about 7 hours, caused severe flooding, erosion, and collapses with low-lying hillside communities among the hardest hit. Sierra Leone's National Disaster Management Agency says emergency teams are responding to disasters and is urging residents to remain vigilant and follow official weather and safety advisories. Vernon Jai completes the story.
More than 300 homes were completely flooded in Porto community of Juba, leaving hundreds of residents displaced. The National Disaster Management Agency says 2 children remain missing as search and rescue operations continue. 8 community boreholes, which provide the area's main source of drinking water, were also contaminated by flood waters and have been declared unsafe for use. In Metchem community, a collapsing compound wall near the Kaluhun Court Barre claimed the lives of 3 people. The deceased include a 5-year-old girl, her mother, and her grandmother. Their bodies have been taken to the mortuary. Meanwhile, at 44 Femi Turner Drive, severe erosion caused a perimeter wall to collapse, sweeping away 3 vehicles. Sierra Leone's National Disaster Management Agency says emergency teams have been deployed to conduct rescue operations and assess the extent of the damage in collaboration with partner agencies. The country's meteorological agency had earlier forecast periods of heavy rainfall throughout July, August, and September. It is urging residents to remain attentive and follow official weather and safety advisories.
Vernon Jai filed that report. In Guinea, a coalition of civil and opposition groups is rejecting the institutions established through elections held during the country's military transition. Members of the coalition include the National Front for Defense of the Constitution, FNDC, the National Alliance for Democracy and Development, ANAD, the Rainbow Alliance, and the Forum of Social Forces of Guinea. They are calling for the restoration of a constitutional order, democracy, and rule of law. Abdullah Hassan reports.
In the streets of Conakry,
The demonstration by the opposition political coalition denouncing the current governance and management of Guinea is supported by some citizens. This is the case of Amadou Bailo Jallo.
It is very true that we do not recognize the institutions resulting from this election because there have been selections since the presidential election, the referendum. There has been no election. We invite the active forces to give us instructions to resume the demonstrations because we have to pound the pavement to move the lines.
While other citizens also call for greater involvement of the political opposition in the management of public affairs, they nevertheless remind us that the anger of some should not be a reason to call for the end of the new democratically elected government.
There is no opportunity today to attend a demonstration. The shortcomings we want to denounce are better addressed in terms of proposals. There have been demonstrations to get us to where we are.
As Guinea emerges from 4 years of political transition following the coup of September 2021, many Guineans yearn for peace and development of the country.
A report from our Conakry correspondent Cherno Alpha Ibrahim Balde and voiced by Abdullahi Hassan. Elsewhere in Togo, the former Minister of the Armed Forces, Marguerite Nyakade, is on hunger strike. She is protesting her detention conditions. Marguerite Nyakade has been remanded since September 2025 for her numerous public statements calling for the resignation of President Faure Gnassingbé. Augustine Colley tells us more in this report.
On July 27, Margaret Nyakade, former Minister of the Armed Forces, began a hunger strike. Imprisoned for nearly a year, she denounces inhumane detention conditions. In the capital, Lomé, civil society organizations are concerned about her fate. Nathaniel Olympio is the spokesperson for the Hands Off My Constitution movement.
It is out of desperation that Ms. Nyakade has begun this hunger strike because all the avenues she has explored to improve her detention conditions have been unsuccessful. This regime is increasingly harsh and insensitive to suffering, and because Ms. Nyakade is so determined in her actions, we are particularly worried because her health is deteriorating further, and we do not know what the outcome of this latest protest action she has taken will be.
Margaret Nyakade is among the long list of so-called political prisoners, a fight deployed by the political opposition and citizens' organizations. Olympio says they are also taking action to secure her release.
Nous travaillons à la libération de tous les détenus politiques.
We are working towards the release of all political prisoners. There are currently around 70 of them. The most prominent are indeed Margaret Nyakade and Patan Ashigbi, who has been in prison for almost 20 years. We are taking action to put pressure on the regime, denouncing these arbitrary detentions with international civil society and human rights organizations. But it's not enough. Those behind bars must be freed.
As a reminder, the former Minister of the Armed Forces, a vocal critic of the current regime, was arrested in September 2025 for her numerous public statements calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Faure Gnassingbé. She had also called on the army to stand with the people during the June 2025 protests, demanding the end of the current regime.
Augustine Colley with the details of that report filed by our Loma correspondent, Ida Bajo. We turn to Nigeria, where President Bola Tinubu has approved a new salary structure for the Nigerian Armed Forces, with increases ranging from 30 to 80% depending on rank. The federal government says the move is aimed at improving troop welfare and boost morals in fight against terrorism, banditry and other security threats. While many have welcomed the decision, some analysts argue that better pay is a basic obligation of the government, not an achievement deserving celebration. Osman Omar gives the details.
About 250,000 personnel of the Nigerian Armed Forces are expected to benefit from a new salary package approved by President Bola Tinubu. Under the new structure, which takes effect from the 1st of September, officers above the rank of colonel will receive a 30% salary increase. Officers from colonel down to warrant officer will get a 50% raise, while soldiers from the rank of private to staff sergeant will receive an 80% increase. According to the presidency, the adjustment reflects government commitment to improving the welfare of troops battling insurgency, banditry, kidnapping, and other security threats across the country. President Tinubu says the package recognizes the sacrifices of military personnel and forms part of broader efforts to strengthen the armed forces through improved welfare, modern equipment, and technology. The salary review is also expected to increase the annual personnel cost of the armed forces from about 660 billion naira to 924 billion naira. While some Nigerians see the development as long overdue, public affairs analyst Henry Gade says government should not present the increase as an extraordinary favor.
We have run our affairs to the extent that even when government do what government officials ought to do, I mean their primary duties, you find a reason for somebody to begin to say, raise unnecessary adulations, and then they want to give them credit for what I don't know. And these are people you have given guns, and their lives are on the line every day. And they're on the roads, and at all manner of places. And they are armed, and you expect them to do that on empty stomach?
Analysts say beyond salary reviews, sustained investment in equipment, healthcare, housing, and support for the families of service personnel will be critical to improving morale and strengthening Nigeria's response to its security challenge. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM and around the world at wadr.org. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traore calls for greater national sovereignty as the country marks 66 years of independence. Former Togolese Minister of Armed Forces Margaret Nyakate begins a hunger strike in protest over detention conditions. Flood disaster hits Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown, leaving at least 5 people dead and hundreds displaced. And coalition of civic groups in Guinea denounces institutions established during the country's military transition. We have guest interview and sports news. Please stay with us.
Connecting Ghana to West Africa. This is Nadidi Tete in Accra, and you're listening to WADR 94.9 FM, Dakar.
Talking health issues, Liberia is renewing efforts to introduce a universal health insurance scheme as part of wider health care reforms. Authorities say the proposed scheme will ease the financial burden on families while providing a more sustainable source of funding for the country's health sector, which remains heavily reliant on donor support. The initiative also supports Liberia's commitment to achieving universal health care coverage and improving maternal and neonatal health outcomes. WDR's Monrovia correspondent Abraham Packer reports.
The initiative took center stage Tuesday at the second National Health Review Conference underway in Painesville, outside Monrovia. It is being held under the theme Introducing Universal Health Insurance in Liberia, Financing Quality Maternal and Newborn Care for All. At the launch, Health Minister Dr. Louis Sokoto said the proposed insurance scheme will improve healthcare financing, strengthen service delivery, and help expand access to quality healthcare across the country.
This conference gives us an opportunity to pause and reflect in the concept of critical time. That's why today we are having this conversation. This universal health insurance, once it's been implemented, is going to protect every Liberian, especially the most vulnerable.
World Health Organization's representative to Liberia, Dr. Olusayo Olu, says Liberia's efforts align with the West Africa regional roadmap to accelerate reduction of maternal and newborn deaths.
We look forward to strengthening our collaboration with the government of Liberia and the Ministry of Health and to supporting efforts aimed at strengthening health financing and building a more resilient Liberian health system.
Health financing remains one of Liberia's biggest healthcare challenges, with many citizens still paying directly for medical services. The conference is expected to conclude with recommendations that will guide the government's next steps toward establishing a national universal health insurance scheme and achieving universal health coverage. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is The Guest.
The debate over presidential term limits is once again taking center stage in the Gambia as the country prepares for the 2026 presidential election. Unlike many democracies in Africa, the Gambia's 1997 constitution does not place a term limit on the number of presidential terms. That has fueled renewed public debate amid speculation that President Adama Barrow could seek another term in office, even as civic groups continue to urge him to publicly rule out first bids. The issue also reignited discussion over the stalled constitutional reform process. A proposed new constitution that would introduce presidential term limits has yet to be adopted, raising questions about the country's democratic trajectory and prospects for constitutional reform. To help us unpack these issues, WDR spoke with Usman Barrow, a political analyst based in the Gambia.
If we have to go by the principle of democracy is talking about majority rule, and the only signification that can actually stop a person from running for the election is when that person is voted out democratically, because the principle of democracy talks about free and fair election. So democratically, most of the people who actually know this actually argue that he can actually run for elections because of the fact that it's true, it's the people who voted him into power, but they can only vote him out of power for him to stop contesting an election. Okay, people are saying that when he was actually to be voted in 2016, what he told the people was that we are going to be a transition government. And by then, this was an alliance. And in that particular time, it was a critical moment. Since they are going to be here for a transition, how about we just give them a chance? And after 3 years, they're going to step out and then we can democratically elect someone of our choosing. But then when they came to power, they decided that we are going to continue till 5 years. 5 years came, people actually voted the government back into office.
There is also the argument about integrity.
For me, the argument about integrity, that is, okay, you promised that this is what you would do, and I think you should hold up to your end. That argument is there, but then at the end of the day, I think situations change, and because of the changes, I'm not justifying the reason the government is deciding to pursue another term, but I'm saying what the people actually did in 2021 is actually affirming to the government that we need you still in power. That is unto ourselves as electorate. But okay, 2021 is gone, and he could actually run for office in 2026 because people had voted him into power. Now, we could actually decide to alter the decision in 2026. If we really believe in our electoral system, I think we should give it a chance. Let us vote him out of power, not actually demand that, okay, he should hold up to his end because it's integrity that is in place. Because democracy actually, another one is the Constitution fully supports him running for that term. So,
all right, so it seems like you're blaming the electorate. But okay, that's a very good argument. Let's look at the proposed new constitution, and which would have introduced presidential term limits, yet the reform process has stalled for years. What has stalled its adoption, and to what extent has political interest shaped the fate of the constitutional review process?
I would have loved that this argument was between us, the citizens of the state. In what sense? Because this actually shows awakening. 2020 draft constitution was proposed. So when it was brought into office, they actually reviewed it. It was amazing. It actually catered for many of the demands of the citizens. At the end of the day, it was like a hope for the people of the Gambia that, okay, this is something that could actually cater for our aspirations in this country. All the things that we have been fighting against, this is actually one of the documents that we can use to address those issues. But just like you explained, just like the second part of your question is alluding, and that is actually true. Political interest actually triggered people that we believe should be the change makers in terms of law in the country, voting against that constitution. And it became now a challenge between the incumbent and also the opposition party that were in the legislature. And so for me, the argument now comes back to say that these politicians are not actually looking out for the citizens themselves, who they claim they are looking out for. So it's for their own interest, because the constitution in question here should have been the very document that was supposed to usher in a new era. But now we can't see that because it's been trashed.
That was Usman Barrow, a political analyst based in the Gambia. Well, in sports, we begin with football as Cote d'Ivoire and South Africa have secured their places in the quarterfinals of the 2026 Women's Africa Cup of Nations in Morocco. The Ivorians topped Group B with a 2-1 win over Tanzania, while South Africa edged the Burkina Faso 1-0 thanks to an early strike from Thembi Katlana. Next up, South Africa faces host Morocco, while Cote d'Ivoire takes on Algeria. While staying with Ivorian football, Hervé Renard has returned as the head coach of the Elephants, replacing Emas Faye, where Renard famously guided Cote d'Ivoire to the 2015 Africa Cup of Nations title. Meanwhile, Egypt captain Mohamed Salah is set to join Turkey's side Trabzonspor after receiving a hero's welcome on his arrival in Turkey. The former Liverpool forward is expected to be unveiled by the club in the coming days. And in basketball, the AfroBasket Under-18 tournament tips off today in Abidjan, with 24 teams battling for the continental honors and qualification to the 2027 FIBA Under-19 World Cups. We've come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Maudou for the technical assistance. Continue to interact with us via our social media platforms, including X, Instagram, and Facebook at WADR English. I am Sankule Jibril Janko. Good afternoon.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. In the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul, Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County, and DCN Radio Riverses County. A big thank you to Radio Graft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening to Newslink.